Getting back to the political firestorm after President Trump's comments on the Charlottesville violence, Democrats, including House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senator Bernie Sanders, all condemned the president in the harshest of terms. Republicans, too, are speaking out. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell issuing this statement, quote, "We can have no tolerance for an ideology of racial hatred. There are no good neo-Nazis, and those who espouse their views are not supporters of American ideals and freedoms. We all have a responsibility to stand against hate." Presidents George H.W. Bush and his son George W. Bush issuing a joint statement, quote, "America must always reject racial bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred in all forms. We are all created equal and endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. We know these truths to be everlasting." Former senior member of the Trump transition team, Bud Cummins, is with me now. Bud, what do you think of this firestorm of controversy?
Well, it's another firestorm of controversy that maybe could or should have been avoided, but I still think it demonstrates the left's desperate desire to distract the president. He seems to play along with it, but to distract the president. So we're not talking about deregulation, infrastructure, improvements at the VA, and things that people sent him to Washington for.
Yeah, it's a good point you make. Politically, the president seems to be increasingly isolated. When he made the statement, quote, "Very fine people were on the neo-Nazi side," I think that's what people are getting upset about. Governor Mike Huckabee just moments ago criticizing that. Will the Republican Party walk away from the president just as he needs them to pass his growth agenda?
Oh, I don't think so, but I think that people are trying to repair the damage. I mean, there's a little bit of a word game that goes on in politics. You just heard those quotes from any number of great Republicans and other leaders, and and it's true. But it's a little offensive that I would have to say this, but I don't think there's any room in the political discourse for white supremacists and Nazis, okay? I mean, I really feel strongly about that, if there's any question. And I think the president does, too. What they're not, what the journalists should do is ask all these people the follow-up question, all these CEOs, but do people, even with heinous beliefs, have a right to publicly and peacefully demonstrate? And I think the answer is yes, and that's where the dilemma comes in, because there's a constitutional right, even for knuckleheads like the ones that appeared in Charlotte, to peacefully demonstrate. And public officials have a responsibility there, and it's a content-neutral responsibility.
Bud, Vice President Mike Pence in Chile answering questions and defending President Trump, doubling down on his Charlottesville remarks. Let's take a listen. I like your reaction.
What happened in Charlottesville was a tragedy. And the president has been clear on this tragedy, and so have I. I stand with the president, and I stand by those words.
What do you think, Bud?
And I stand with the president, too. I think if you ask the president, are you for Nazis, he's going to say no. Did you support this rally? He's going to say no. Did you help plan the rally? No.
He said, though, very fine people walked with them, though. We have people saying no fine person walks with a Nazi, right? Okay,
let's think about this. The first I heard about this rally, the lead was it was something to do with taking down Civil War statues. Now, that's not nearly as clear an issue as whether you support white supremacy. There's some legitimate debates, and a lot of good people would argue that maybe we don't need to take down all these statues. So maybe there was a really nice person who hates Nazis that was out there because he's a Civil War buff and he was marching. I don't know what the president was thinking about. I'm sure there's good people out there that are misguided, too. The point is, they had a permit. They marched. I'm not for them. The president's not for them. But I really question the local government's use of tactics and strategy. I commend the officers for the restraint that they showed, but I don't think they got the support of the manpower they needed. There are proper ways to handle these things where those two groups should have never come together. And it's a shame that Heather Heyer and others were injured and killed.
It's a disgrace. White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, who's been on the ropes recently, according to news reports. This is what the president had to say yesterday about Steve Bannon. Let's take a listen.
I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But Mr. Bannon came on very late. You know that. I went through 17 senators, governors, and I won all the primaries. Mr. Bannon came on very much later than that. And I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist. I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon, but he's a good person, and I think the press treats him, frankly, very unfairly.
We'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon. It sounds like a lukewarm assessment. Is Steve Bannon on the way out?
I wouldn't be paying. I'd be paying my parking spot monthly and not annually if I were him. That was not a wholehearted endorsement by the president. And again, the president has his own style. Most people probably wouldn't say that publicly, but you'd have to think that indicates that there's a little friction there and maybe a change is coming.